Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, today I am honored to bring before you Senate Bill 870, which is legislation that will commit Oregon's presidential and vice presidential electoral votes to the candidate that wins the national popular vote. If the phone calls and emails to my office have been any indication, this bill has a lot of misconceptions around it, and I'd like to try to answer a few of those today. Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution establishes the Electoral College, which is comprised of a number of prescribed electors directly tied to each state's elected federal senators and representatives. These electors actually vote for the President and Vice President of the United States, but depending on the state in which you live, the electors may or may not be bound by the popular vote of the voters in their state. Article 2, Section 1 gives the states exclusive and plenary power to choose the method of awarding their electoral votes, which is why there is a compulsion around the popular vote in some states, but not in others, and why congressional consent is unnecessary to make this change. Entering the NPV Compact is currently within the states' rights to adopt, preserves the Electoral College's structure and institutional value, and avoids the state-by-state winner-take-all methodology of awarding all of its electoral votes regardless to a single candidate. Winner-take-all, currently the methodology of all states but Nebraska and Maine, was neither debated at the Constitutional Convention nor discussed in the Federalist Papers. Speaking of which, detractors of the national popular vote movement often contend that it was not the intention of the founders. I would argue that our current electoral system as it exists today doesn't even mirror the system crafted by the founders. The emergence of political parties, the natural tendency to hoard power have instead caused the college to contort into a system that preserves the power of a state's majority party. The moment many of our states adopted winner-take-all statutes of awarding electoral votes, long after the death of the founders, was the moment that we deviated from our founders' vision. As for the protection of small states, those 13 states with only 3 or 4 electoral votes, I believe these small states are actually the most disenfranchised by the current winner-take-all system. If you aren't a closely divided battleground state, and most states are not, these states are ignored by presidential candidates during campaign cycles, not because of their low population, but because they are already considered to be safe or lost. 12 small, non-battleground states have about the same population of 12 million people, similar to the closely divided battleground state of Ohio. Those 12 small states have 40 electoral votes combined, which is more than twice of Ohio's mere 18 electoral votes. Yet in 2012, Ohio received 73 of the 253 post-convention campaign events, while the 12 small states received none. Why? Because if you know that the 12 small states are safe bets, but you have to fight for the electoral votes in Ohio, you're going to go to Ohio. With a national popular vote, because each person in the United States will count, you cannot count on any given state. You have to fight for them all. And if enough states sign on to the compact, it is truly possible that Oregon could finally become a battleground state, because all of them would be. Similarly to the small states being overruled by the big states argument is the fallacy of larger urban areas overruling the rest of America. When you start looking at the demographics of the country, you realize this myth is born out of a misconception that cities are bigger than they actually are, and that the big cities comprise a larger fraction of the nation's population than they actually do. In actuality, 85% of the population in this country lives in places where there are fewer than 365,000 people. Additionally, historically big cities don't necessarily control statewide election outcomes. In blue California, Republicans like Arnold Schwarzenegger and George Deukmejian were elected governor without even winning the largest cities in that state, namely Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento. Moreover, these larger cities didn't even exist at the time the Founding Fathers were around, undermining the argument that the large population centers might somehow control the country. In 1790, 3 years after the Constitution was written, 95% of the country lived in places with fewer than 2,500 people. Voter fraud? Minimized in a national popular vote scenario. Voter fraud is actually more likely to occur when most states utilize a winner-take-all method, as a smaller number of people in those battleground states can affect enough of the popular vote to swing all of the electoral votes in that state. On a national level, it becomes a much more difficult thing to strategically employ such tactics. Finally, the argument between whether or not we should promote the values of a republic with elected representatives or allow for outright democracy. Our system of government allows for us to directly elect our representatives, like Senators Merkley and Wyden on the Congressional Senate level, and they make decisions for us on our behalf in Washington. Similarly, when we vote for the president, we actually vote for electors to choose the president for us. Hence, we carry out the Republican system of government forward, theoretically. In presidential elections, however, the electors are people that 99% of us never have heard the name of because they never have to campaign to general voters. In most states, political parties choose potential electors, often as recognition or reward for service and dedication to the party. When candidates win a popular state vote, all of the electors, again generally selected by the political party of the triumphant candidate, get the opportunity to vote. These electors then meet to cast their ballot for president and vice president on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December following the presidential election. Not only is this process complicated and inefficient, it doesn't fully reflect all the principles of being a republic if electors don't have to campaign to the full electorate to be elected. While it makes sense for us to elect representatives and senators by state, it does not make sense for us to allow a truly national position that should transcend state boundary lines, like the president and vice president, to be elected by people most of us will never even know. In a true republic, I would argue that the two truly nationwide elected positions, the president and the vice president, should be elected directly in the way that we elect our statewide officials, through direct democracy. The republic piece is allowing and trusting those individuals to be the head of our executive branch. As I understand it, this chamber has voted on and passed the National Popular Vote Compact legislation 4 times previously, only to have the legislation perish. We have a long history in this chamber of realizing the inequities built into the current system, and I believe this legislation is a great step forward. This is about giving all voters in the United States, regardless of where they live, the ability to be heard in the most important of our elections. Thank you, and I urge an aye vote.